Was the American Civil War truly inevitable, or could it have been stopped? In 1861, America did not simply walk into war. It drifted toward it for decades, like a nation sleepwalking toward the edge of a cliff. Long before the first gunshot echoed across Charleston Harbor, before smoke rose over battlefields, before brothers aimed rifles at brothers, the country had already begun to split apart in spirit. The North and the South were no longer living the same American story. In the northern states, factories roared day and night. Railroad tracks stretched across growing cities. Immigrants poured into crowded streets searching for opportunity. Industry was transforming America into a modern economic power. Northern politicians spoke about progress, expansion, and a future built on free labor. But in the South, the rhythm of life was different. The Southern economy rested on vast cotton plantations under the burning sun. Cotton had become one of the most valuable products on earth. European textile mills depended on it. Southern wealth depended on it. And beneath it all stood millions of enslaved African Americans whose forced labor made that system possible. To many Southerners, slavery was not simply an institution anymore. It had become the foundation of their economy, their political power, and their entire way of life. And that was the problem, because in the North, opposition to slavery was growing stronger every year. Some Northerners saw slavery as morally evil. Others feared its expansion would destroy opportunities for free white workers. Newspapers, speeches, churches, and political movements began turning slavery into the central issue of American politics. For years, politicians desperately tried to hold the country together through compromise. Every few years, another deal would temporarily calm the storm. The Missouri Compromise. The Compromise of 1850. New laws, new promises, new lines drawn across maps. But every compromise only delayed the explosion. Because America kept growing westward, and with every new territory came the same terrifying question: would slavery spread or stop? That question poisoned everything. If new states entered the Union as slave states, the South would gain more power in Congress. If they entered as free states, the North would gain control. Neither side trusted the other anymore. And soon, arguments turned violent. In Kansas, pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers flooded the territory, each determined to control its future. Towns burned. Men were murdered in the streets. Newspapers began calling it Bleeding Kansas. America was already fighting a small civil war before the Civil War had officially begun. Inside Congress itself, tensions became so extreme that a Southern congressman nearly beat Senator Charles Sumner to death with a cane on the Senate floor after Sumner delivered an anti-slavery speech. Americans watched in horror as their government descended into rage and chaos. The country was cracking apart. Then came another shock. In 1857, the Supreme Court delivered the infamous Dred Scott v. Roos Sanford decision. The ruling declared that African Americans were not citizens and that Congress had no power to ban slavery in the territories. To many in the South, it was a victory. To many in the North, it was terrifying. People began wondering if slavery might eventually spread everywhere in the nation. Moderates disappeared. Anger replaced compromise. And rising above this storm was a tall, strange-looking lawyer from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was not yet the legendary figure history would remember. He was still a politician, trying to hold together a nation that was tearing itself apart. He believed slavery was morally wrong, but more importantly, he believed America could not survive permanently divided between free states and slave states. During one famous speech, Lincoln warned, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." The South heard those words clearly. When Lincoln ran for president in 1860, Southern leaders feared disaster. Even though Lincoln promised not to interfere with slavery where it already existed, he opposed its expansion into new territories. Southern politicians believed that if slavery stopped expanding, it would eventually die. And if slavery died, the Southern economic system would collapse with it. When Lincoln won the election without carrying most Southern states, panic spread across the South. One by one, states announced their secession from the Union. Crowds celebrated in the streets. New Confederate flags rose above government buildings. Southern leaders declared they were leaving peacefully to protect their rights, their independence, and their future. But in the North, many Americans were furious. They believed the Union was permanent. No state had the right to destroy the nation simply because it lost an election. And Lincoln agreed. For Lincoln, this was bigger than politics, bigger than one election, bigger even than slavery alone. If states could leave the Union whenever they disagreed, then democracy itself might collapse forever. Would every future election end in separation? Would America survive as a nation at all? By early 1861, compromise had almost vanished. Families argued across dinner tables. Churches split apart. Newspapers fueled hatred daily. Entire communities prepared for conflict they still hoped would never come. But deep down, many Americans already knew the truth. War was coming. Then, in April 1861, the moment arrived. In Charleston Harbor stood a small Union fortress called Battle of Fort Sumter. Confederate leaders demanded surrender. Union forces refused. Before dawn on April 12, Confederate cannons suddenly erupted in fire. Shells screamed across the harbor. Explosions shook the fort. And with that thunder, the American Civil War began. What followed was unlike anything America had ever experienced. Young men marched off believing the war would end in weeks. Instead, it became 4 years of unimaginable destruction. Brother fought brother. Entire towns disappeared. Fields turned into graveyards. At places like Antietam, Gettysburg, Shiloh, and Cold Harbor, thousands died in single days. Soldiers who survived described endless smoke, deafening artillery, shattered bodies, and screams that haunted them forever. But underneath every battle lay the same enormous question that had haunted the nation for decades. What kind of country would America become? A nation divided between slavery and freedom, or one united under a single idea of liberty? As the war continued, Lincoln himself changed. At first, he fought mainly to preserve the Union, but over time, he came to believe the nation could never truly survive while slavery continued. And so, in 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, transforming the war into a fight not only for the Union, but for human freedom itself. The cost was staggering. More than 600,000 Americans died. Cities were shattered, families destroyed, and entire generations scarred forever. Yet when the war finally ended in 1865, slavery was abolished, the Union survived, and the United States emerged forever changed. That is why so many historians say the Civil War was unavoidable. Because by 1861, America was no longer debating small political disagreements. The nation was fighting over two completely different visions of freedom. For decades, compromise had acted like a thin bandage, covering a deep wound. Eventually, the wound burst open, and the United States paid for it in blood. But out of that tragedy, the country was forced to redefine itself, not as a loose collection of divided states, but as one nation, one union, and one unfinished promise that all men are created equal. Do you think the Civil War could have been avoided, or was it bound to happen? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.